So, hello everyone, and once again, this is Pedro Fernandez from Archie9 and Archie9 Learn, and finally, I'm very grateful to bring this to you, and thank you all for contributing, and also for pre-buying this tutorial. It's taken a while to get everything recorded and going. I recorded this one, I worked on it, and then I just recorded the audio after, and I'd like to thank you ever so much for your patience, and hopefully you enjoy this. The structure is very simple. We start off just from the beginning, and we've put that little extra bit in where we start with the SketchUp and how it progresses into the final piece. So it's a short tutorial. I've compressed it. I've tried to keep it in real time where it's possible to keep it in real time and where I think it makes sense. And I've tried to show you a little bit of the thinking that's going behind this. So the techniques are quite simple, and you'll see that. But it's actually the thought process that's behind it and how it is expressed that I really want to show you guys. So let's get stuck into it, and I once again just want to thank you all for all your support. Everyone's been amazing on the YouTube channel, feeding back to us. Please send us your feedback, let us know what you think, and please show us your work. I really want to see what you guys are working on, how you've worked this up, how this has contributed to actually getting you creating some good stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up for just a little bit and come back again and start the tutorial. Hope you enjoy it. My name is Pedro from Archie9 Learn. Enjoy. So let's get our hands into it, and on this section of the tutorial, and just starting off, we're actually going to show you how we actually started with our SketchUp model. Now, we did render this in V-Ray, but it was very simple, and it was basically just to try out and get that first soft pass, that RGB pass, if you can call it that. Many people call it beauty pass, RGB, whatever you call it. But anyway, we wanted that softness and that ambient occlusion pass that was like just black and white, or just the blue, because you have the sky and the sun, and not totally desaturated. And as you can see, I'm just basically running through the passes, but this time in SketchUp. And I've just brought up the V-Ray menu. Now you notice I'm just panning around, and I've done very little with the V-Ray settings. I basically use just the same old V-Ray settings. And now the great thing about V-Ray in SketchUp is it basically uses the sun that's in the scene. So that's your V-Ray sun. Now, bear with me, because when I was doing this, I was not a pro at, I think this was the first time I'd actually opened up V-Ray, and it was on a friend's computer. It was fantastic. It was super intuitive, and we use this in the office, but for 3D Max. So all the menus, everything is the same. We just wanted to extract that beauty pass. I mean, you can use so many render engines. As you can see, I've basically not even touched any of the settings. The only thing you have to make sure is that your render output matches the size of the screen when you're outputting your 2D from the file in SketchUp. So I'll show you that in a bit, but as you can see, I've lowered the settings just so it's quicker to show you. And basically I'll just run through this. Now I've just hit render, and you'll just see that pop up in a bit. And this is basically just how we started off. So very simple. Just made all the materials white, or most of them. I mean, some of the blocks that were used in this model were a bit tricky. As you can see, some have the color, but hey, I wasn't really mattering too much in regards to this. I just wanted to really experiment and do something artistic. So as you can see, I've just, if you want to save the output, just go to output. I've lowered the resolution on this one actually, and you'll notice that all the settings are basically just out of V-Ray. I have not altered this. We use 3D Max with V-Ray, and we know these settings professionally, but it's all been just the most simple ones. Now, you'll notice that one important thing we do use, and you'll find this in your PSD file, are the render channels. Now, the render channels are quite important. What are render channels? Render channels are basically everything that renders out, that composes the image. So you can have your selection passes, you can, like your white color, you can have your diffuse pass, your reflection pass, and all these things help to amp up, and they're better covered even in my other tutorials. And I believe compositing depth, I really use these render passes to the max, but in this one I really needed the selection passes and the normal pass, render ID, and white color. And you'll see me kind of battling about with this. At the time, what I did, I think, was basically load everything and just select what I wanted. So I had a bit of a bad time setting all this up, renaming, so it took me a while to get into it. Now, these passes are really the base of everything that we started off with with our PSD and the way that we're composing it. And some of the, just to name a few, I think the most important ones were the lighting ones, the raw lighting. So that enables us to select the sun and what's in shadow and isolate that, make the shadows more intense, less intense. Normals, which is also very important for selecting, and your render ID or white color. I think we used render ID, and that's just very good to select elements quickly. Now, that's the great thing about this. It enables you to select elements, and then when you blend this with what comes out of SketchUp, and you make sure that your V-Ray frame buffer, the one you're exporting, has the same size as your file export that you're doing from SketchUp, you can blend these into one PSD, and you can really start to extract all the full potential of this 3D information that you're using in 2D. Now, this will all make a little more sense once we get into it, and once you start seeing, if you're a SketchUp user and you're pretty much at the start of V-Ray, you can use any other render engine. You can even go without it, to tell you the truth. After a while, I started thinking, well, this really, once I start compositing a little more time, I don't really need this. I can just paint all the softness, and I don't really need to go around with it. So you see I'm fiddling around the output. Again, as I mentioned, it's very important to have your output the same size as the size that you're outputting in terms of your SketchUp engine. So when you're doing those line renders that you're outputting and saving out, very important to have those the same size. Now, I think I did this 1/800. This was specifically just to show you guys just an example. And as you can see, there we go. Just making sure that I have the same size. I would probably have to put 191 and just change that to 191 on the other one as well, but I haven't. This is just for test purposes and to show you. Now you'll see me bringing up this 2D graphic once again, and I'm just going to make sure, just for the example, that you can change it around. Now that's, again, super simple. I noticed that it didn't have the exact same ratio, so I unlocked it and basically just input the same number, just so I'd make sure that it rendered out exactly what we were getting out of the render engine, and they should match up. So you can see that I'm running through just the various styles, just to be able to actually look at the colors and the textures that are applied. And you'll notice the whole model, except glass, is basically white. And that's what you want to create. You want to create this base that you can paint, this canvas, this kind of grayed out, and you can paint on top, and that's what I wanted to export. Now, one of the problems is when you receive, if you're not doing it yourself, or if you receive a model, it's never as you want it. And I think this one I received, and I had to touch up, but I touched up also specifically for this this tutorial. And as you can see, I didn't really want to get into it. I didn't want to spend too much time around. So this is more an example of showing you guys, hey, okay, you generally want to have everything white. And that's the way to go about it, because you can paint it. You've got your render ID channel, and you can select that quite easily. And that's also the power of using these passes. The passes are great, and I can't stress that enough. But anyway, let's continue on with this. And you'll notice that I'm cycling again through. And when you're exporting, another important thing to notice is also your intensity of your shadows, and just how intense you want those, how non-intense. And as I'll be matching up these with also what I have in my render passes with my raw light and my raw, I think it's a different name in SketchUp, but with my raw lighting and raw shadow, I can select these, so I can give them the color they want. And I can't stress that it's important to have references. All this process started with references, and it started with a solid base. And that's where you want to start off, you know, have a good path in your mind. Then you stop, you analyze every so often. And that's the way to go about it. A lot of this project that was done, it was cut up, and I've chopped this up to be a very compressed video, and so you stop seeing the parts where I'm actually stopping, having a look at reference, and then rethinking things, and I go back and forward. And this is the artistic process. Everyone tends to think that artistic process is very linear and goes from one step to the other very quickly. No, the best things are the ones that go forward, backwards. Now, let's just run through this render. It's taking a bit of time, but anyway, I'm filling that up with just a little bit of some tips and techniques that you can apply to your general art, I guess. And you can see this is basically what we want. So very soft, very kind of ambient occlusion type render, just with the shadow, and just something that we can overlay the lines and we can multiply and just use the various passes within Photoshop. And here you can see all the passes that are rendered out. Now, at the time, I believe I just added everything. Sorry for that screen error there. Doesn't seem to be showing up too well. I'm running through them. Some of them are black, some of them are colored. As you can see, render ID, that colorful one, which enables us to select. Now, we can do a lot of these with the lighting passes and diffuse pass, and there's so much potential to add creatively to this, and it's much quicker. I mean, if you've got the tools at your disposal, just use them. I mean, you don't have to paint everything by hand. You don't have to do always the old kind of super slow method. No, let's use what we have at our disposal. We don't have to be purists, and in the end, it's what you want to achieve. So your tools should not limit you ever. It's always all about what you want to achieve and what your vision is, and that's the most important thing with anything that we're creating. Now, as you'll see, I'll bring up the material editor, sorry. And in the material editor, what I want you to notice is that basically what we did is use on the white material a very soft ambient occlusion type thing. Now you'll see as zoom in, and you'll notice that there's this kind of soft gray shadow around everything where it intersects, and that's called ambient occlusion. Now I use the technique that we use a lot in visualization, especially in 3D Max, and I thought, hey, we should be able to apply this to SketchUp. And that's what we did. We applied this to SketchUp. So I'll just grab that white material. And remember, this is probably my second or third time using this. So I grabbed the white material, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, I need a V-Ray dirt. And there we go, on our diffuse channel. So I can kind of just, I'll select that again. Yeah, there we go. I already had a V-Ray dirt. And as you can see on the left, it says text dirt. And that basically just means that it's the texture for the V-Ray dirt, and that will basically, wherever it intersects, you have, I think the spacing is 100 centimeters, I believe. I'm not too sure what, I just tested around with it. Now all I have to do is, for the white, I have to choose the color I want. So where I want it to be white, which is everything else, I select that color, and I think it was like a white, and there you go, the dark gray on the black. But I didn't want black, because black would be too aggressive. Where it intersects directly in the beginning of the radius, one plane with the other, that would be, if I put it 100% black, it will be 100% black, and then it will fade off to white in a radius of 100, and I'm assuming it's 100 centimeters, so that's going to be a meter. It depends on your units. So I hope that clears it up for you very quickly, how we started off with this base, and I'll just show you a couple of the render passes that we kind of got from SketchUp. So, and that kind of wraps up where we're at with our V-Ray render and our SketchUp. And now let's really go into the fun part. And the fun part is all about creating the PSD, and that's really where everything comes together. So let's quickly jump into that. And as you can see, I'm already starting to get into it, and you can see that I'm already starting to fiddle around with the multiply modes, and it's all about just finding the balance where you have things in your mind. So you will notice that, for instance, this one is not even multiplied. It's on normal opacity mode, and your blend modes are at the top where you see normal, the top right, and I put that, the V-Ray render, at 52%. And that's basically just more or less on top of our SketchUp render, and I'll call these V-Ray render and SketchUp render just to distinguish. So our V-Ray render, those are the ones that come out of V-Ray engine within SketchUp, and our SketchUp ones are the 2D ones that we export. Now, again, it's all about using the tools how you want them to, and it wasn't written. The great thing is that I don't really do these. I think this was my second attempt, and there's a previous tutorial which was the plan view, the section view, sorry, yeah. So basically, I was experimenting, and I was just trying to have a bit of fun with it, and that's the way we should always look at these types of things. It's, you want to have fun with it, you want to enjoy it, and you want to kind of go along with the idea that you have all your references. Now, I started to select the main things, and those selection passes that we spoke about, the render ID, were really important, or the material ID, as you can see above, which is basically the different materials. And what this enables us to do is to quickly select what's what. And many times when we have a complicated project, I mean, we don't really have time to be selecting everything individually and running around and cutting out. That's like cutting out 50 million times, and you want to facilitate things. And as an artist, you never ever want to complicate things more for yourself. So you just want to go the simplest route and the one that's most effective for you. I thought this was the simplest. There could be others. I'm not too sure. But anyway, I'm starting to select the various things. So the pool, the ground, select what's water, select the building, and select the most important parts. And these are the parts that I'm going to start, overlaying textures, blending in new things, painting in, adding new shadows, contrasting more of the shadows. And that's basically how it starts off. And you'll see, just going through the selection process and just getting everything right, and that's again getting that base for us to start on. And you'll see that I start dividing these out in folders, and these folders are kind of just to facilitate when we start to really photo bash and bring in those new photos. So again, this is also the simplest way, and you'll notice that I'm working at a pretty much zoomed out all the time, just going in for small details, small selections, nothing too big, because I don't want to spend my time within the image. I want to spend out and see and get that global feel to it. But even at the moment, it's still very technical. I'm yet to make my biggest gestures. And the biggest gestures, I think one of the biggest ones was actually isolating that C and really starting to understand where that C ends and where it begins. And it's quite tricky because you have the render and you don't quite have the continuation. But again, because it's so rough and you're kind of going on a sketch, you can really afford to go back and forward, and you can really afford to have some of that looseness. And again, you'll see I'm pretty much never too zoomed in more than 200%, which is double what we have. And that's because if it's rough, why do you need to work so close up? It's all about mixing your time with your creative part, and you want to really get into that state of flow and really start making a great image. And that's really the most important part, is really to get that state of flow where you start understanding you're really getting into the image, and you're really just starting to really understand it and really create something, and each idea pushes a new idea. So anyway, let's get back to it. And as I continue to name through the layers, I just basically start creating them. Again, as you can see, I already have the main ones. So I have the sea, I have the building, and just basically all around, and start to even get the decking, which is important, the roof lines, all these important details. So as you can see, there is a lot of importance given to actually setting up and starting with your base, and I guess that is the most important thing. It's very easy to get dragged straight away into creating something, and it is great. I do that many times, but at least having a base where you can start off will help you immensely. And you'll see that I've created these layers. Another important thing is also understanding about your references, and you'll see this pop up in just a bit, a reference board. And I knew where I wanted it to go, and I had an idea in my head, and I created a board with various ideas. I mean, Alex Holgraf is there are many other artists. I'm sorry I can't remember them, but it's basically just a search on Pinterest and just on Google, and just trying to find things that inspire me, and not copying them, but actually looking at things that could inspire me. Now, you'll notice on screen that I've actually got kind of a watercolor brush, and you'll see that, this was the first creative thing I did. It's like this splatter and watercolor brush, and I'll try and include this in for a link to where you can possibly get these splatter and watercolor brushes. And you'll see that this is kind of me just trying out something and just experimenting. And it's quite funny to see this, because you'll see that the process is not linear, because I'm not following something that's, I haven't got the experience in this to make it linear enough, but I'm actually experimenting with it and already trying to find out that, hey, I need some framing. Framing's going to work well. And I've just created a new layer mask and just hidden. And I've just painted in where the C group, we have the C group. So I've gone to Google SketchUp, and I've actually located an image of where this place is in Cascais, in Guincho, in Portugal. It's a beautiful place for you guys that don't know it. And I've actually just tried to start off with it, just multiply it, add it to multiply as a landscape, and just have that information and that visual noise that you'll hear in many of the tutorials that I've created, talking about visual noise and the importance of adding that extra texture. So I'm just going into all that painting, starting off the process, stopping with the hard edge. It's important, again, one thing I did notice is that, if you have landscape and you have that landscape, you don't really have a hard edge when it encounters the sea. The sea has rock and it softly drifts off to the sea. And I've noticed this. I've just noticed this, and I'm trying to get around it and see what I can do. So you'll notice that I've opened up the sea, and where we have that intersection line, and I've started to experiment. I've just grabbed the splatter brush and I'm just painting around that splatter. And again, I'm just trying to minimize what we have in terms of that really immense differentiation we have between the terrain from SketchUp and the sea. And I find that this actually starts to work really well. Just trying to get rid of those lines, those really tough lines, and it's starting to complement. And you'll notice that, I start to find the essence of it, and already it's kind of the main gesture, and this is like the main gesture that continues for everything, and that I really find that really gives some certain interest to the piece. So I'm continuing, again, looking at this in real time. You get to see actually how my brain is actually thinking when it's doing this, and how it's going back and forward and really trying to figure out what's going on. I load up just the default brushes, and those brushes have come with I'm pretty sure these are probably not the default ones, but I kind of simplified the default ones that you guys have got in the package. Pretty much have everything there except for the ones which are proprietaries, like the splatter brushes, which I'll try and have a link to that, or you can have I think we have posted up on Archie9 Learn. It's not a tutorial, but a blog post with what we have in terms of brushes. So you see, again, minimizing, painting in, experimenting. So have an objective, how can we get past it? And I saw that tough line, those really rigid lines, and I thought, hey, wait a minute, we're doing a painting, so why don't we paint those lines out? Softening everything up. And again, once again, trying to see how we can soften it up, what's happening, what's not happening. Again, the process is always going 2 steps forward, 1 step back, trying to figure out what's going on. And a lot of this presentation is also interesting to see that the way is not always linear. So I brought in another image. Now, I thought this one would be really interesting because it's this kind of old paper with watercolor. Immediately multiply, and I shove it into the folder that has the group that has the image, and I'm trying to add a little more noise as well, just trying to age it a bit more, just make it look like it's kind of got that watercolor feel, but also a little bit of that noise to come in and just kind of break up that image a little more. So again, just experimenting around, desaturating it, seeing what the multiply is doing, how it's getting by. You'll notice we don't have those tough lines. Those tough lines are not coming out anymore of the shore. This is because we had a photo, and you can use any photo. And you'll notice there's 2 of them, so I can put it on overlay, and then the second one on a multiply. And that's up in your superior right hand corner, your blend mode. Now, once again, we put a V-Ray lighting, and now what this is doing, as it's on multiply, it's just multiplying the shadows, just making for more intense shadows. And then I just add a new layer, and I'm trying to add that ambient occlusion to kind of make it fit and make it sit. To really, if you look at items when they join up, they have this thing called ambient occlusion. So when your screen intersects with your desk or your computer, where they intersect, there's this line of shadow, and that line of shadow is very important, and that's one of the most important things, because that is what we call ambient occlusion, and it's that contact shadow between things that makes them sit. And even in ArchViz, when we're doing interiors or something like that, a lot of what we do really relies on just basic things, and that's one of them. Contact shadows just have shadow gaps that really make everything come together. Now, again, from past experience, I also noticed that, it's quite important. I remember from architectural school, the definition of lines, and I've created this lines layer, which I experimented around with as well. And it's about creating that visual hierarchy. So it's about your darkest point is what you want to bring out more. So, if you're making it too dark, you're probably going to bring out, like I am at the moment, the ceiling of that left building, which probably is not that important. And you don't want to bring that out. So you really have to squint your eyes and see, hey, what do I want to bring out? And this line was maybe more of a creative thing to really go for and to see if it worked. I think in the end we maintained some of it, but scrapped some of it as well. This is the process pretty much for this. Now, another important thing you'll notice, and I'm not even talking about the painting. As you see on screen, I'm saturating, desaturating, looking at what I want to do on screen, and I'm kind of also talking about other things that are going through my mind at the same time. And one of them is in regards to, so as you'll notice, I've also flipped the image. And just like in other tutorials that we've spoken about, flipping an image is just giving you a whole new perspective on things. So when you flip something, your brain becomes unaccustomed. And I've noticed in the studio, especially when we're all working together, that when we're into something, our brain kind of eludes itself. It's a constant battle of trying to look at it and analyze every time you've done something. Your brain will kind of go at it, hey, this looks amazing, because it's looking at it and it's kind of absorbed it, and it's blocked out all the parts that are looking a little bad and trying to fill in the gaps. And this is the power of our brain, and it looks fantastic. It starts to look fantastic to you, but when you give it to someone else, they'll go, hey, this doesn't look that good. And that's the power that your brain has. It's really interesting once you start analyzing it and flipping the canvas, just trying something completely different, just grading another way, color balancing, more contrast. Generally, what it does is kind of make your brain see in a whole new way. So if you desaturate this completely, you're seeing it in a new way. If you turn it around, as I do various times, you're also seeing it in a totally different way. So you'll notice below that I've saturated a little more the image, and just to bring out a little bit more of what's going on just under that central piece and where it lays, and that's already bringing your eye a little more. And you'll notice that we have this balance between the right side of the image, where we have that kind of O from the ceilings, and the left side, which is also empty space. And this again it's going down to all the basics of drawing, about composition, about what do they say? Not empty space. About well, I can only remember this in Portuguese, but when you have a volume and negative space, and it's these things. So you have these two white parts that are negative space, and they're kind of counterbalancing. And I'm starting to experiment with different colors, and this is great, showing you a bit of this process, because I'm sure this is also going to inspire you to think differently about things. And that's the main thing, to think differently, not think like we have to do these techniques and they're absolutely the way to go, but actually inspire you to think, hey, wait, why don't we do it this way? Why instead of black we don't do it green? Why instead of blue we don't do it white? And this is the power of creating something like this. And if you have, once you create something, please feel free to mail it through. I'm always eager to look at it, and I love seeing what people are creating, and we've had some really nice stuff come through from other tutorials. So yeah, please feel free to share. Now again, I'm going into these watercolor splatter brushes, and I just did a quick Google search, and I'm just painting in. And you'll notice even the layer and how it's set, the blend is very simple, just as a normal. And I'm just trying to work out, hey, could this look good to add another layer of information, another little bit of depth? So one thing I did start to see was that there was actually a line of force here, and I'm painting with this scratchy oblique brush, because I thought it does match this line of force. It goes from the bottom left to the top right, and between these two negative spaces. And again, it's about reinforcing things that are in the picture, and things that we feel and that we see, and kind of understanding them, apprehending them, and then using them. And again, you'll see I'm always rotating. You can use just your R on your keyboard to just rotate around. And I'm constantly doing this. I don't think I've even flipped the canvas, but R in general, because this drawing can be seen from any perspective, really helps. So again, switching off, just to clear your brain, clear what you've seen, and trying to understand what it's adding, what it could add, and where we could go from here. So I start with the selection process once again. Just start to see that, yeah, that definitely needs something going on in there, or else it's just too much of a negative space, too much of a big white endless space without much information. Again, I'm just layering this up and building it up. It's I guess it's kind of similar to an oil painting where you layer up the layers, and you'll notice the normals come up. And again, quicker than just selecting it, I guess. It's just your magic wand brush with a W keyboard shortcut and just selecting it, and just basically using that to select. And I don't think that I use that many times, but normals sometimes, if you're using for a section or something, can be really great. Or even if we're not straight on, we're not planimetric views 100%, I can select the faces that are in shadow with the normals, just because it tells me everything that's left, everything that's right, and I can select what's in shadow and just accentuate those shadows. So I think this is actually the first time that I flipped the canvas and started seeing from a different point of view. So once again, just trying to counterbalance what's going where, and I don't quite want that to get out of the page so much. There we go. Again, using a gradient. So very simply just using the G on your keyboard and just basically using the gradient just to make it fall a little more into the center of the image. Again, the downtime is generally just to look, analyze, and think, what is the next step? How is this all going to work globally? Now, the funny thing about this, and as I'm reviewing, it's really interesting because I kind of understand that I'm taking quite a bit of time looking at it and analyzing it and thinking, where are we going with this? And this is probably derived from when you're starting off to get into these, your brain is starting to adapt and starting to see how these things function and starting to understand, hey, wait a minute, this will function like this. Now you'll notice that, interestingly enough, I thought the canvas is not exactly working, and I wanted to look at this as you would with any paper. So I wanted to kind of think, hey, wait, this could be strapped on a desk, and I'd be painting this, and then the desk would be larger, and I wanted to somehow simulate that a little bit, to have that kind of safe space that you have even when you're doing a view in 3D Max, and you have for those of you who do use it, you have this thing called safe frame, which basically is a little offset from the outside of the frame. And I thought that'd be really cool to have and handy, and it could also enable me to use a little more of the canvas and get a little more creative, and see how we could compose the shot a little better. And that's very simple. That's just using that crosshair tool on the top left, as we did, and just expanding. Make sure you do not have selected, when you select that, at the top you'll have a little button that says delete cropped pixels. So you don't want to delete them, you want to maintain them there so you can crop around and the information is still there. So if you've pasted a photo or something and you're cropping, it will continue. And now we're getting to the good stuff. We're finally getting into using those textures, and just basically starting off with those textures. And the first thing I thought was, let's start off with the decking. And even with the decking, you have to consider, wait a minute, what is the orientation that I go with the decking? So I thought, hey, the best thing is probably to go with a different type of orientation to the strength line that we have running through the image and the visual. And again, this is just grabbed, I thought it was just grabbed, I think it's grabbed from textures.com. Control E, I just merged them together. I'm not really worried about perfection once again. And then I start to look at it and always question, is this scale on this looking right? And if you start to look at things like this and question, lining them up, you'll see I'm doing this roughly. But in the end, you're probably not even noticing that much of if it's a line, not a line. Now, another thing to experiment with is exactly how we're going to do our overlaying. And I put this at multiply, I remember at the time. And it's all about, once again, just looking and seeing how dark do we want it, how do we want it to integrate, and we want to conserve that shadow. So whether we're using multiply or overlay on these, we start to conserve the shadow. Now, I've chosen the V-Ray lighting pass, and that's basically just the light that incides a pure light. So that has no ambient light, nothing. It's just where the sun incides and how it incides on the plane. And this is really good. And you'll notice that I have my channels up. And if you go to Window Channels, you'll be able to select those channels. Now, I've created a new. I've grabbed one of the channels, I think it was the red one, and I just dragged it down to create a new layer. And that's just in that paper with folding paper thing. And that new layer, if I select it and I can contrast it, do whatever as I did, which I contrasted, I can select everything and use it as a selection pass. And that's what I've done. You can see here that I've just created that mask, just a layer that's just empty, and I've created a mask and I'm overlaying it to see how it goes. And I can invert that and it will actually create it. Invert the mask and it'll create it on the shadow, so it won't be creating it on the light. And now that's just trying something different, trying to think a little bit further. And again, I can rub into that. So the great thing about it being a mask is I can paint into it and get rid of what I don't like. And that was to give, again, that noise, that visual noise where we have the mask. So here I am painting frenetically through this, rasterize the layers. So again, it's also about trying to maintain things as quick as possible. I desaturated. Control U if you want the shortcut. Again, shortcuts, because we use so many programs, I can tell you I'm not a big shortcut person. I think they're great, and once you get into them, but using so many programs, I'd rather have my brain filled up with other things than shortcuts. I just want to look for the easiest way to use them. And bringing up the normals again. So you see, that's the power of the normal. So I can select, hey, I want those shadows. I put it select everything, but I want that side. And that's the power of normals. I can now accentuate the shadows, even though they're not actually the shadows, they're shadow parts. And I can start to look at it. And you can see already the drawing is gaining a new dimension here. It's really got a new depth to it with this shadow and this contrast. Many times clients, what they want is no contrast, no shadows, not heavy shadows. But hey, that's a personal style, and it's all up to you and how you want to do it. I love it. I love the contrast, and I love to see these bright things up against these very dark. And I like to really bring out what we have and show that emotion and let that flow through your drawing. And I guess that's okay. It might not be the best for everyone, but it certainly works for the stuff we do. Now, I think I left this shadow on, but again, looking at it, I'm not 100% convinced that shadow is looking as it should. I think in the end I did get around to altering it a little bit. And as we start to look at again a stoppage and get into the next phase of it, and just experiment around again with the planks, see what we can do. I did, after all, understand that the planks was not all that space, but that was because I used probably the selection a little too extensively, and it did actually have a garden in that other little place. And here we go again, a shot that's in perspective and that you'd never think would be probably used for this. And I thought, hey, this could look really interesting. It just depends on the way that we use it. We do need that green space. Again, I had some freedom in this, so I wasn't really respecting the original design probably as much as I could. But if you're delivering a concept, you do want to go in that way, and you do want to kind of experiment and really try something different. So now, just selecting those little planters, I've brought in this gigantic texture, but I thought that would work really well. And that's basically just for those little planters in the garden, and that's to give some visual interest. Again, another thing to be very wary of is your values and also your saturation. You'll notice that we're going for a relatively desaturated look. So we want to keep that desaturated. We don't really want to bring in something that's going to be super saturated and going to bring in something that won't work at all. And again, reusing a little of the textures we already have. So we already have that plank texture. Let's maintain that. We can even clone stamp it. And now I'm starting to even think about painting a little bit of that ambient occlusion and setting the layer on multiply. And that's to give that differentiation and to make those parts kind of come apart from each other. And this is another thing that I learned that's very important, in especially in these illustrated views, is really painting in that softness and where things intersect. And that really gives a kind of it really separates items from one another. And it's also important to have those parapets. If you notice, there's these white parapets that go around. And these white parapets and this separation that exists between the two things really help separating everything. And sometimes you can even fake these white parapets if it's just for the drawing to separate things. So you can use your line tool and just create a 2 pixel, 1 pixel line and just paint in just a fake parapet just to give it a different type of separation between one another. Now you notice I'm going around and I'm starting to look, hey, wait a minute, now we have the glass that we need to worry about, and this glass isn't really singing, it's not really doing what it should. So I start to paint in the glass and the glass panels, and I start thinking about these and how we can use them. Again, going straight away to what I have, my render ID, my selections, and again, this is kind of low res and it's to be quick, so I really haven't worried about making this absolutely perfect. But it simplifies for sure it simplifies the selection. And there we go, painting that shadow, and just it's crazy just how good and how much this, just with a soft brush, what this shadow does. And it straight away, it just detaches everything from one another and it makes it look so much nicer, and it just really helps the whole visual hierarchy of the drawing, and just adding a nice color balance to add into that glass, so it actually starts to look like glass and become glass. Again, it's always the first thing I use is simplifying and making things quicker. Why select everything by hand when you can just Y tool, just select it? Sometimes it is a pain to get rid of it, but it's so much easier than just going around and selecting everything. And the unfortunate thing is that this was done at a relatively low resolution, so we're not really having all the benefits of getting in that detail. Someone asked me, what is the importance of why didn't you go bigger? And again, like I said previously, it's just to go faster. And there we go. Again, amplifying that intensity and making what's in shadow appear a little more in shadow. And I guess it's that game of separating, and as they do in concept art with mountains, when they paint one mountain one color, and that's generally a darker, more contrasted color, and they paint the back one a lighter color, and they'll paint some fog in between. Now, as you see, the pool has also started, and that's also been painted in on top of the planks layer. So that was the original planks layer. So we're starting to get into the really juicy bits, and this is actually where it really starts to become fun. And I found these trees on Google, and just a quick Google search. First thing I do is set them to multiply, and as you can see, it gets rid of the white straight away, but still has a little of that sketchiness and that noise in there. And I thought, hey, let's actually try these and just experiment them with the multiply and see how that works out. And you'll notice, again, the scale. First thing I did was bring down the scale. So never interpret anything as kind of immediate. Even with the clone stamp, I was looking at the difference in the brush and getting rid of that transfer. Now, the one thing that's affecting me here is when I'm actually painting these, I'm actually painting them and I'm continuing on. If I want to paint a selection of them, various, I can't. So I have to paint them one by one. So I have to select, I merge them together, and I can just quickly select and sample and just paint back. And I have some differentiation in scale, which lets me also change them very quickly. And this is the quickest way to do trees. I guess it's a very kind of quick and simple way. Ideally, you want to paint these yourself. I have to say, you could even grab them or render them in your render engine, and you can just fiddle around with it and just do something totally different. So this is the great part. I can just clone stamp them. I have various scales just on one layer, and I can sample from that layer and just paint and paint agglomerations and just add again to that visual noise. Just keep on painting, and that actually looks like it's an array of trees. And I can even sample again from the same layer, from the current layer, and just keep on painting. And this adds some dynamic to the whole view, and that adds really starts to add again some punctuation and some interesting parts to it, and really starts to liven it up quite a bit. Now I did notice once again too saturated. It's always a kind of it's always a battle with saturation and getting it right. And now the easiest way to add your shadow is to just create another layer, just duplicate that layer and put it underneath and just select it. And now what I've had, and just select it and darken it. I used to use saturation or Control L and levels and just darken it and just move it a little further down following the direction of the sun, and just deleting or masking it off till you get the shadow that you need. Now, as I don't have a selection, the best part would be to select the actual trees that you have on top and delete that from the shadows, so you'd have the shadow around and you wouldn't have so much of a darkening. Now, I did experiment around with that. There is so many ways you can do this. That's just one of them, and I thought it was one that worked more or less for this occasion. Again, just on and off to see how it's going. Mask out that, so keeping what we have on the left, so we know exactly what we have in our layer and what we can use. And just brushing back that shadow that I've hidden, and now I can just quickly add. And again, it's what we talked about: going back, going forward, going back, going forward, experimenting what's working. Again, desaturating and also bringing it down in terms of values, so you have that little bit of shadow. Now, a funny thing is, I started to think about, hey, if we're going to have shadow, we're also going to have a little bit of highlight. And I'm starting to experiment around with brushes that may have highlight and what highlights we can use. So I found something that I thought would have just this dabbling type of effect that would kind of would somehow simulate what we have on trees. Now, my patience wasn't the greatest for this, so again, it's a quick one, and it's just trying to emulate a little bit of that rim light that you get on things when you have the sun coming in that direction, and just trying to look at it again, always as a drawing and always simulating what we have. So just looking at the various details, really. So sped this up just because looking at the same thing very slowly really has not much interest. So I'm kind of powering through this, drawing this up, making it just on the edge of the trees, and again, just experimenting with different brushes, experimenting with what looks good. Once you have a workflow down, you can then start to work on different types of things, different colors. Once you have your base, you can always look to extend that base and to distort whatever you have learned previously. I always remember a teacher of mine saying, you must first learn to construct before you deconstruct, and I think that's the most important thing. And even like Picasso was an amazing drawer, amazing classical drawer, and when he did get into his cubism, he was already at the top. So drawing was just not enough anymore, and his brain was so active for it that he had the basis to go elsewhere. Now you notice there's a halt in here somewhere, and this basically what happens is one day I stopped it and I said, okay, I'm going to come back to this tomorrow and look at it with fresh eyes. And this distance gave me enough perception to understand, hey, our planks are too desaturated. If we're going to have this gray, we need to saturate a little more the planks. And that's why you see this boost of light and this boost of color coming from those planks, especially those planks, and that's changed it. And even in the water, there's a little more saturation. And it's little things like this sometimes that just change it completely, because I knew I was doing those grey roofs. Once I put up those grey roofs and the undulating roofs, I thought, hey, no, this is going to be too much grey, and we need some colour, and we need some ambience here. We need to spice in this up a little more. And that's what we did, exactly by just adding a little brown colour, and I think it was a hue saturation layer, and just adding that into the mix. So as you rotate and add these planks, and again I think these were from textures.com, as we rotate them and add them and subtract them, we're really starting to work on this ceiling and starting to see how this roof works actually. Sorry, not ceiling, roof. And I start to understand how is the water falling, where should it go. Again, I'm doing this in a very creative form, but these are things even as an architect we always need to worry about, and it's in our first nature to worry about these things, and where the top of the roof is, where the water would fall, how these would possibly be created. And I guess that's an architectural thing to just think off the bat about these. Now, it's also important to understand that if we do have those different angles that they're at, we also have to simulate that. So you can see that I darkened one of them, and that simulates that the light is coming from the other side, and the tops of those are actually the ones creating light. Now, again, it's not as dark as the faces that are facing upwards, as you can see upwards, whoever's looking at the image. So where we have that facade with the windows, that's darker. So again, it's the visual hierarchy here. It's how dark. If it's turned completely opposite, it will probably be darker. And also these parapets that we spoke about, and trying to minimize the impact of that black. I did see that black probably wasn't working as well, but I think these parapets, I went back and forward, not happy at all with the outcome. But again, just experimenting is the only way really to see where you go with it. I didn't realize though that I was doing this within the actual group, and the group's masked off. So again, it's easier in some things, harder in another. But I think I did get there in the end, understand that if it's masked, nothing will get out of there. And I mean, looking at it, you can see I'm not too happy with how it's looking. You understand less of how the water is falling. I do think this got altered, and my brain again is going just back forward and painting in that ambient occlusion. That ambient occlusion has done one thing here. It's made it actually look like it's got a parapet, and this is really stuffing up, if you could say that, stuffing up how we are understanding this roof and how this roof is built. So it's to be careful with these things, because visual representations, they do represent reality, and we have to be careful in the way. If it's not looking correct, it's because we're not doing something correctly. Again, off and on, but sometimes you do need the space to actually realize this. Having a bit of a hard time here going in the right direction, just because again I tend to work so zoomed out and try to understand how something contributes to a whole that sometimes get carried away. So, as you'll notice, all these grouped elements are really starting to compose the image, and it's quite funny when you look at it and you think, hey, wait, he hasn't really done that much. There's not much going on, but there's a lot here already. And it's this approach that you should always take with an image, which is kind of don't fluster yourself and always look at it by parts. So have a global vision and then just break it down into parts. And I find this is true for pretty much visualization, illustration, anything. So you just need the broad strokes, and then you slowly start to bring everything a little more together, just give it better details. And you'll notice, again, same process, Control T, transforming, rotating, using the multiplies, painting in soft ambient occlusion, using your parapets, again the white ones. And this is kind of to give the illusion, at the moment you're seeing the rotation, I'm just looking at what's looking correctly in terms of the visual aspect. Now, apologies also on my voice. I'm a little sick today, so you'll notice a bit of a change in voice. But yeah, as we go through this, you'll notice that I'm, again, zoomed out, and I'm actually working the other way around, which is quite funny. I'm working completely opposite and rotated around. So that gives me a completely different take on how I'm doing things. And this is also helpful if you just hit the R shortcut on your keyboard to actually work in the direction that's most favorable. So if you're doing horizontal lines and they're not quite horizontal like this one, I can rotate and make that horizontal. I can kind of simulate it so it's easier. And again, just bringing out those strength lines and just balancing everything. And it's always a balancing act to counteract anything you do with another part of it. And I think now there's a good balance in this image of your neutral space that you have on your right, and it's done with that splatter brush and just overlaying various textures. And on your left with this kind of emptiness, somewhat emptiness that you have from those roof lines, which also kind of somehow simulate that empty space. So rotating back, just rotating around, looking at various points of views. And now we start to get into just, minor details. So I think I even start looking at, it was the windows, and again, W on your keyboard, and always looking for those shortcuts, those little things that can just make the process a little bit easier. So your one tool, and at the top you'll notice that I have sample all layers. So this means that basically I can select all the layers that are underneath. So it's kind of rasterizing the image and merging everything together so I can select. And I just bring that up and just find that looks quite cool if I just bring it up and show it white. It also helps to break apart that massive extension of the facade. And you'll notice that I don't really want us to focus that much, but I do want to give it some of that visual context, visual noise in that part. So I thought that was quite important. Again, just a couple of trees to get everything nice and balanced. Trying out various things, sampling again, which one do I want? It's so much fun. It's so much fun when you're composing an image, and you'll notice you're constantly rotating your head to have a new perspective on it. And I even find myself doing this now, re-looking and kind of explaining the whole process. And again, just S, and I sample from that layer. Make sure to have that layer selected. If you have that layer selected, everything is much easier. Again, if you notice at the top you have sample current layer, and you can change that to all layers, to current layer, and a few other options. So that means the same thing as we had with the one tool. If you hit W, you'll have sample all layers, current layers, layers below, current and below as well. And it's a nifty trick to use, and it's really good. So you'll notice very quickly that there's just a slight change, and I don't think I captured this, but it's nothing too important. So basically, it's just a color balance to warm up that center, and I think a little bit of the levels on it, and that's just to focus your eye and to give a little more warmth to that central piece of the image. And you'll notice one quick thing, and that I thought would be fantastic as I try to compose that negative space, is actually I start to think about, hey, if this is a drawing, an architectural drawing, what do architectural drawings usually have that can give some life and character? And I thought, hey, coffee stains, why not? And I remember from my times in uni. So so I grabbed a coffee stain from textures.com, set it to multiply, brought it in, just dragged it in, and set it to multiply. And now I'm starting to play around with it and see basically where it fits within the image. So I'm rotating it around. And again, all these elements are compositional elements. So you definitely know that they have some visual importance, and this is really important. As you can see, the image is being built up very simply, very I could say relatively quickly. I think this was like 3 hours total with some cuts and breaks, and it's just being built up to a form where you can look at each element individually and say, hey, no, this fits well here, change it around. And this is the constant process you have to have, and always think about it. So again, not too happy with it. I brushed out, so I created a mask, and I started to brush out so it looked like it was a little more irregular. So just any irregular brush. And then I started to think, hey, maybe we could overlay, because you know what happens with coffee mugs. You put them down, and then you shift them around a little bit, and you create various types of forms. So that didn't really work. So I think I maintained like two of them. And again, one thing I'm looking at is that top with the roofs. And you'll notice that we also added, I think it was like a dirty texture, and we set it to multiply on top. And that texture, I can see now, it's got a bit too much visual relevance, and my eye is dragging there a little bit too much. So again, this is always a process. Look at your work in a very kind of critical form. So you're always criticizing, and this is something that I usually do with everything. So any work that I'm doing, be it personal, professional, I always look in a critical form, and that work tends to evolve over time. So I don't like to let it sit forever. I sometimes go back to it and look at it and try to reevaluate what I do differently. And this is also a great means to really understand the learning process and how far you've come over time. So now starting to get into the garden and to the selection and just composing, adding the material, and starting to again eliminate element by element, get rid of the basic whiteness and the basic texture, and start to add some visual interest into just how that small garden is composed. So again, just using. It's very interesting because even with the one tool, you'll notice that many times you can do a combination of various masks and the way that you use those masks. So, for instance, you can select just using your select tool or your one tool, W, and then with Control or Shift, you can add or you can Control Shift or Alt. You can add, subtract, remove your selection just by using again the one tool, or just by selecting even a mask that you already have made. So you always want to give yourself the least work possible. You'll notice I selected again a nice rough brush, and that's just to experiment with giving that grit and that dirtiness to the scene, and how that is used. So again, the soft light just to extract and give that extra little bit of depth. Now you'll also notice just below this layer 35 that I have my concrete, and you'll notice I just rasterized it, and that just basically means that I've made it from a smart object into a rasterized one. So it doesn't. You can, if you scale it from now on, you're going to lose quality. But this is also important rasterize, just so the process is much quicker, and that you can actually transform around. You can use the texture in a much easier, quicker fashion. And many times what happens is I'll see artists and they'll have these 2-3 gigabyte PSBs, and these basically it just gets unmanageable just because of all the smart objects, and you never really compress these. I mean, you never really go around using them again and transforming them, and it's minimal, the change. And you should always work in an optimal direction, so you should always make your artwork sing and not worry too much about these things that you probably, you're setting yourself up with more technical things than you should. Now again, always every action has a reaction, and you'll notice that once I put that concrete, that other piece, the garden, starts to look a little bit faded, and I don't really like how it's composed, and it doesn't really come through. So I brought in another image and I color balanced it and just leveled it to where I thought it was right, upping the black point. So as you can see on the left, the black point, making everything that's black a little lighter and everything that's white a little blacker, a little darker. And that's what I mean when I say up the black point, up the white point. So on this part, again, just the selection, I just select, control select the mask, and that will bring up the selection, and then I'll contract to come out with what I thought would be something like a curb, just to simulate it and to give a little bit of differentiation as well. So just looking at it, seeing how it's looking, everything seems to be coming into order. So just darkening that part, just trying to find, okay, if the shadow's coming from if the light's coming from the top right, that would be a little darker, just to bring that out and make it so you understand the shape a little better. And here we are, a flipped version, again, just flipping around, but you'll notice a pen, and I thought a pen would be fantastic. What would we put in, what would an architect put? And I thought, one pen, no, we need something more. So I didn't go with this in the end, but I thought it was funny, and I thought to include it in. And you'll notice that how I sampled it, not sample all layers, but sample current layer, and I could just easily use the wand tool to get rid of it. And then I just start basically masking out pens that I think are too much. And I kind of like this formation, and I still like this. It would have been interesting to continue with this, but in the end I thought it was putting itself ahead of the image, and it wasn't quite working the way it should. But again, just great to see the techniques. Take off the transfer. So basically when I'm painting, it doesn't have any transparency, and it's very easy to just paint and get rid of what we want. If you have the transfer, sometimes there's little bits of transparency left, and in the end when you're working like that, it gets to be a bit too complicated. Again, just roughly trying to give an idea and the impression. Put that to normal. Levels, again, always the things that I continue to say: levels, values, and colors. These are your main things to get right, and everything should, once you get that right, everything should kind of come together and match. Just projecting the shadows, and you'll notice I created a layer, just made it very dark, and just a little bit of blur on that shadow. So that's kind of the ambient type occlusion that each pen has. I just wanted to do it very quickly. There would be other and better ways to do it individually for each pen, and you see how that pen's on an angle, so I want to just emphasize that and really bring it out with that shadow. And your drop shadow, so when your contact shadow, so when something is touching, it has just a minor contact shadow. So now one of the things that's starting to look to me as if it's missing is the highlight. The highlight, and how you'd always have a highlight. If you have a shadow, you're going to have some light projecting that shadow, so I assume you'll have a highlight. So one of the things I sometimes do is just create another levels and just bind it. As you can see, just hold the Alt between the level and the layer below, and that will bind it below. And just paint in your highlight. And I just leveled it up, and that can just be an easy way and effective. As soon as you change the scale, you change the scale of the drawing. That's one incredible thing. As soon as you put a humanized object next to something, you're giving it scale. So, and that scale, once you put something else, like you have the coffee and you have the pens, you've now suddenly understood that this is like an A1 paper. And it's just so interesting, again, to notice how scale and size works between the various elements in a drawing. Now, what you just saw before as well, just that little text, I was looking for some architectural fonts, because I thought, hey, let's do a legend like in architectural drawings. And then I brought in this other drawing, which I thought was really nice. It just had a bit of noise, and it made it look like it was still quite sketchy, but had a more of an artistic and architectural feel to it. So I thought, hey, let's bring this in. And again, you'll notice just working with the drawing. So just painting in, painting out, looking for what's balancing out the drawing, and very simply, I just desaturated, Control U, and just desaturated, and just set to multiply the layer, masked it out, just painted in what I needed. And this is the process pretty much for everything and how it works. And again, just getting my layer order correct so I don't have all that splatter influencing my pens and things like that. So you'll notice that sometimes, for instance, what happens is I'll come back to the drawing, so I don't do everything together. And then I come back to the drawing, and when I come back to the drawing, like what will happen next, there is small parts that have changed. And this is just basically because I very quickly alternate this, and one of those was actually the roof part. You can see it looks much better when I fade everything out. And I think I just took down the opacity on everything and just made it a little less heavy. So you have now those values connecting a little better, again, with that left side, that inferior left side. And in the building folder, what I've done is basically just, again, create those groups. And as you can see, I'm just trying to add a little bit of that pen that you'd have in your architectural design, those Sharpie pens, and just trying to emulate that a little bit with my quick sketch. Again, you can find this in the brush sets. Just use any pen, use various brushes and try and experiment. There's no specific brush, just try and look at your brushes, look what you have in your set, and just really go for it. And experiment, and that's the way you're going to get there. And you'll see that this has a really nice effect, and that it basically creates this very nice drawing effect that you have in your scene. So again, just experimenting and trying to see, okay, maybe that might work, reconfiguring it, also bringing back what we've done before, and just as we spoke of, basically always go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and always try and second guess what you're doing. Well, not second guess, but review what you're doing, so you can review and you can get it absolutely right. Now again, just painting, just adding a little bit of that noise just to see how that looks and how that will come through. And sometimes I'm just painting and I'll have opacity. Again, like I mentioned, I'm using my Wacom Intuos, and it has opacity, so I can really control how thick I want it. But at the same time, I can use the fill or the opacity in the layer blend mode, just as you've seen now. And that also really helps. You'll notice that popping up sometimes. My Wacom, I hit the express keys, and sometimes the express keys just show up on screen. It's very common. You can actually deactivate that in your Wacom settings. So you'll notice again those parapets, and this is something that we went back and forward to really design those parapets, and just with a nice single thin line to just give it that little extra effect. And I think this is where it kind of really came into its own. And I think this was, again, just reviewing and constantly going back and forward has really made me understand, okay, maybe this is the scale. The scale was just too thick. I was working at a macro level, and just too zoomed out, and we need something that's a little more finessed and delicate for those parapets. So as we continue to look through the file, and slowly, we're now at a phase where I think we're quite happy with how it's looking, and it's really nice. You can see that I've even added that crossing those lines, those white lines, and that was just the basic pattern, oblique pattern that was added, and that oblique pattern I think really gives it a nice feel. And again, it's picking up on those strength lines, and it also breaks up and gives a little bit of that added noise that you need in there. And I think that's the thing with these visuals. You have to find a kind of a language that you find works for you, for your visuals or for your illustrations. And it's these types of overlaying of information and adding special touches, drawing on, that really takes it to that next level and really helps build the scene and helps you create your own visual style. And having those influences and those references that we initially spoke, this is always on my second screen, and it's always something that I keep in mind when I'm designing the actual illustration. So you'll notice from here on out, it's basically little things, and I'm just trying to see, okay, what can make this look better? And I stare at, and I pause, and I look, and then I just reach the conclusion. Let's get in some pencil sharpenings. That could look really nice and really bring this scene to life, and you'll see that I'll just bring those up. So we just start to correct these, and we'll cut them out, and we cut out exactly what we like. Again, it's all about masking, because sometimes we don't even know what we're going to keep in, so we want to mask that out. And the great thing about these is they kind of already have a little bit of that ambient occlusion and that drop shadow included within the cutout. So I found that to be something really nice. Now, although I didn't keep this to the end, I do really enjoy this extra little touch that we added. And you guys can even add this on the file and just experiment and see what you can do with it. Because I do find that these little touches, they just bring the drawings to the next level. And I mean, if you start thinking about this, you start thinking about all the other types of little things you can add. You can have a ripped paper, you can have a paper folding effect, you can overlay so many things and just experiment with so many different things at the same time in a drawing. It's all about really creative and endless possibilities within each drawing. So as we move through this now, we've basically got everything we need. And now we start to really think about those details and those small parts. Now there were still some parts like on the right and the middle, these white parts that I think still deserved a bit of attention and still needed to have some textures overlaid. And again, it's the same process. So we're selecting our groups, we're selecting what we want, and then we're selecting a texture and overlaying that texture. And next, if we want to, we then start to paint in the ambient occlusion. And that's really what starts to bring the whole image together. So there we go, I've masked out the path. So we have our path now selected, somewhere about there, and we start looking for a appropriate texture that we like. And again, CG textures, or former CG textures if I should say so, textures.com. Go into that, find an appropriate texture, bring that texture in, align it, and just take it up to the path. And you'll notice I placed it in the wrong folder, but no worries, we can just open up and go to the right one. Just running through them, closing everything up. Again, trying to work as organized as possible for what we were doing, put it in the path. There we go. Multiply. Bam. It's pretty much there. So that's gotten rid of that white point that really was missing out on information. Now just to paint in maybe a little bit of ambient occlusion or something like that, and it's pretty much there. Now some white spots, again, this is where you really start to notice, and the masks, the power of the masks come into play. So I could quickly just select that and go into my mask that had the terrain and just mask that out. And then you just want to paint in your ambient occlusion, and you want to really simulate where we have this darkness, and to bring that out, because you have a lot of gray here, and I still think it's actually probably a bit too much blending with the one on the right, that surface that's in shadow. And I even paint some white. So again, using mid values, and you'll notice that this is another thing. You'll notice that I use a gray background and it's not 100% white, and that's for a very important reason. Firstly, if you're using mid tones, it means you can paint white and you can paint dark. So you can go both ways. Whilst if you just have a white background, you can only go darker. You cannot go to paint highlights in white. And this is the great thing about using that gray background. Now you would have noticed as well that we've kind of added the curves and levels, and the tones are nearly coming a little more together at the top. If you look through your file, you'll see the grading, and that really starts to bring out the punchiness of the file. So check that curves layer at the top and check how that's affecting each channel. So you'll have your RGB, and you go into your red, green and blue, and you can see how that actually affects each part of the file and what it's doing. And we're heading to the final part of this tutorial now, and it's really coming to an end. And this is where you just put the final little fun touches. And I think in this one especially, I just wanted to add some of these power lines, if you can call it power lines, that really accentuate the form and direction. I have these at the top of the image, and I also wanted to place these within the model itself. So there we go. Again, line and just rub out, so you have that simulated pressure, pen pressure, and at the same time it's very straight. So that's another neat trick. Just use a line and just rub it out, and it tends to show just a quick line almost that's drawn. And I think it's really coming together. It's actually pretty much there. And again, I'm just looking at the final little bits and trying to understand, okay, what can we add here? Just final little touches. And sometimes in the very end is when you actually start to create the biggest strokes, and you do the most impulsive things, because you've been looking at this for so long and your brain's kind of adapted. So what's happened is, as your brain's adapted to the image, it's always seeing it the same way. Sometimes, like I said in the beginning, it's great just to go wild and try something completely different. Sit it down for a while, come back to it in 2 hours, and try it again. And you'll notice, especially as we go through this and these end touches, we will notice that will happen. So I've created this layer, this mask again, which I started thinking about, hey, what about if we paint a little more of that blue in for the sea, and how is that going to affect the image? And I wanted to just add this curve and experiment with it. Obviously, I don't think it was working that well like that. But then set to multiply, find a nice brush, again, similar to a highlight or Sharpie brush, and just paint in. And I thought that this was really starting to make it look great. Again, it was a little dull, and I guess as I looked at my reference board, I started to see, hey, no, this is inspiring me, and I think that we need a little more color within here. So that's the great thing about sitting it down and just relaxing your eyes for a little. And again, taking the feel down, experimenting. You can experiment with the hue. You can do so many different things. And I did the same thing again for the terrain, to add a little more color in parts that I thought were quite desaturated. Again, used it on multiply. You can experiment with a variety of overlay modes, and that's one of the most important things, is to experiment and just try it out. And you'll notice that this is quite a heavy impact on the image. It really changes it because it's added a lot more color and saturation into the image, and a lot more of that is now singing, and that blue from the pool is connecting up visually with the blue from the sea, and that's really giving it that extra importance. And now I'm looking at little details like the legend, adding that legend, the architectural legend, and I wanted to call it the tribute because it was a tribute project that for an old project that I worked for a studio for Cónica Arquitetura in Lisbon, and I just wanted to call it the tribute and really have fun with it because I worked on this project. It was probably my first visuals that I did as a freelancer for a company, and I guess I wanted to just do a retake on it and enjoy it and have a bit of fun, so I ended up calling it the tribute. But and I just googled around some images like architectural legends and things like that, and I just overlaid or multiplied and added it in. I masked it off, so again using a nice brush that adds a little bit of that noise and just makes it look a bit imperfect, so to make it look old. And again, trying to draw a little by hand, just holding shift so it goes in a straight line. And trying to simulate also section cuts and things like that. It's really the sky is the limit with this, and you can have so much fun with it. That obviously wasn't working too well as a dark line, but nearly coming to an end. Just breaking that up a little more, as you would. Again, I didn't even draw a dotted line. I thought, hey, let's just create it, make it all look sketchy. And there's your section line, as you'd have in a drawing. And we actually did do the section, and if you have a look on Archi 9 Learn, you'll see the illustration of the section, and it's on YouTube as well, but sped up this time, so it's not like this one. And then just our final touches, which is the framing, just really the final little touches. And as we have that safe frame that we worked on, we can now afford to go 100% white, merge everything, unsharpen it so it punches out, and there we go. We're pretty much there. We can use your Nick color effects to have experiment around, and this is now free. We paid for it, but this is now free. Add a little bit of Glamour Go, and that kind of brings everything together, and you'll notice that there's a pretty good saturation, and it's just brought everything together. And there we go. We're basically there. We've done everything. I'm very happy with the image, and it was not bad for a second try this type of illustration. And I hope that you've learned a couple of techniques, that it's been inspiring. Please feel free to share whatever you create, and also your criticism, and I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time. I'm Pedro Fernandez from Archi 9 Learn. Please keep up to date with Archi 9 Learn and our YouTube channel. We'll always be releasing new stuff, and you know where to find us. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for listening for about these 1.5 hours. Hope we haven't bored you too much. Have a good day, and yeah, see you soon.